"My brother will manage Rosebury from this evening," Duke Charles announced. Every steward, tenant, representative, and household officer stood inside the great dining hall. Frederick accepted the ring of estate keys. "At last," he said, looking towards Evelyn. "This land will be managed by someone useful." A few guests laughed. Charles did not. But he did not correct his brother. Evelyn slowly removed the final key from her waist. For 9 years, she had opened the grain stores before winter, the wage office before harvest, and the infirmary whenever disease entered the villages. She placed the key beside Frederick's untouched wineglass. "Then you will have no further need of my work." Charles lowered his voice. "Evelyn, do not make a scene. I am ending one." The following morning, her carriage left Rosebury Castle. Charles expected her to return before dinner. By sunset, the chief steward had followed her. By midnight, the estate accountant was gone. Before the week ended, 12 village representatives stood outside Evelyn's new gates with their families, tools, and contracts. Frederick looked across the empty estate office. "Where is everyone?" Charles stared at the reports he had never learned to read. "With my wife." 9 years earlier, Evelyn Harcourt had arrived at Rosebury as a young duchess determined to become useful. She did not expect immediate affection from Charles's family. The Harcourts had held their title for generations. Evelyn came from a respectable but less influential house, whose finances had often depended upon careful management rather than inherited wealth. Margaret Harcourt, the Dowager Duchess, considered thrift an embarrassing subject. "A lady should never appear aware of what things cost," she told Evelyn during her first month at Rosebury. Evelyn looked at the household accounts. "Someone should be aware. We are paying 2 suppliers for the same coal." Margaret dismissed it as an administrative matter. The steward at the time blamed a clerk. Charles thanked Evelyn privately. "You saved the household nearly £400. Then the records should be checked across the estate. You need not burden yourself with that." 2 weeks later, he left another file on her desk. "Handle this before I return from London." It became their pattern. Charles told her she should not concern herself with estate matters, then relied upon her whenever those matters became difficult. When tenants protested a sudden rent increase, Evelyn discovered that a local agent had applied the same charge twice. When a merchant refused to deliver winter grain, she negotiated a new route through Greyhaven. When disease reached Briar Village, she reopened an abandoned house as an infirmary and hired Dr. Nathan Cole before Charles returned from Parliament. Every problem she solved appeared later in a report prepared under a male official's name. Charles signed it. The estate improved. He received the praise. Evelyn told herself the result mattered more than recognition. Rosebury's villages became stable. Wages arrived on time, grain stores remained full, empty transport wagons began carrying goods on their return routes instead of wasting half their journeys. The people working beneath her authority knew who had designed the system. The family living above it did not. Charles loved his wife. In private, he was attentive, intelligent, and often grateful. After Evelyn prevented a winter shortage, he held her beside the library fire and said, "I do not know what Rosebury would do without you." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Then perhaps you should introduce me to the estate council." He hesitated. "My mother would object." "Your mother objects when I speak to the gardener without gloves. There is no reason to provoke her." "I am not asking to provoke her. I am asking to work under my own name." Charles kissed her forehead. "Later, when the household has adjusted." Evelyn accepted the answer. Later became one season. then 3 years, then 9. Lord Frederick Harcourt returned from Europe in the spring. He arrived with 6 trunks, 2 servants, and no money of his own. Frederick was charming enough to make debt sound sophisticated. Within days, Margaret was praising his knowledge of continental estates, though he had never managed so much as a rented house. He examined Rosebury's accounts for one afternoon and announced that the estate was being operated like a charity. "The grain reserves are excessive," he said during dinner. "They are calculated for 2 failed harvests." Evelyn replied, "1 failed harvest is unfortunate. 2 is pessimism. 2 occurred within the last decade." Frederick ignored her. "The infirmary produces no income. The reduced rents for injured tenants encourage weakness. And why are we paying to transport goods from widows' workshops? Because those workshops employ 83 people. An estate is not a charitable institution." Evelyn set down her fork. "And when everyone who grows your food has left, will you dine upon the rent book?" Margaret's mouth tightened. A duchess should not discuss revenue at dinner. Frederick smiled, especially when she understands so little of it. Charles looked at his brother. "That is unnecessary." But he said nothing more. After dinner, Evelyn confronted him in the library. "You corrected his tone. You did not correct his claim. He is trying to prove himself by insulting me. Frederick has always spoken carelessly, and you have always treated my silence as the easiest solution." Charles closed the file before him. "He may have useful ideas. He wants to sell the grain before winter, dismiss families who have worked here for generations, and close the only infirmary within 20 miles. He wants to increase revenue. He is calculating what can be taken. He has not calculated what must remain." Charles stood. "I have agreed to let him review the estate. You have agreed to let a man who has never survived a harvest redesign one. Allow him an opportunity." Evelyn looked at her husband. "And when his opportunity becomes everyone else's hardship, we will correct it." She heard the familiar promise inside his answer. "Later. After. When necessary." Frederick spent the following month presenting Charles with dramatic forecasts. He claimed Rosebury could double its profits within a year. His figures assumed every tenant would pay on time. Timber prices would remain high. No medical emergency would occur. No transport wagon would break. Grain prices would remain stable. Workers would accept lower wages. No family would leave after losing its home. Evelyn marked every unsupported assumption. Charles rarely read her notes. Frederick accused her of resisting change because the existing system gave her too much informal influence. "She has made herself indispensable by making every decision pass through her," he said. Charles did not believe the accusation entirely, but part of him disliked how often managers asked for Evelyn when he entered the estate office. He was the Duke. Yet the people who ran Rosebury waited for his wife before making difficult decisions. Frederick understood his brother's discomfort. "You have allowed domestic assistants to become authority," he warned. Charles began to see Evelyn's competence not only as support, but as evidence that others might consider him dependent upon her. He decided the situation required a formal boundary. He did not tell Evelyn beforehand. The estate dinner included the chief steward, village representatives, accountants, land agents, and members of the Harcourt family. Evelyn assumed Charles intended to discuss the autumn harvest. Instead, Frederick stood beside him, wearing the estate officer's chain. Charles lifted the ring of keys. "My brother will oversee the operations of Rosebury from this evening. Evelyn has carried responsibilities that should never have been placed upon her. From now on, she will concern herself only with the household. Several officers looked towards Evelyn. Thomas Hale, the chief steward, lowered his eyes. Margaret smiled with satisfaction. Frederick accepted the keys. At last, Rosebury will be managed by someone useful. A few guests laughed uncertainly. Charles remained silent. Evelyn waited. She gave her husband enough time to correct his brother. He did not. She removed the smaller key from her waist. It belonged to the grain office. Charles recognized it. Evelyn. She placed it on the table. Then you will have no further need of my work. Do not make a scene. I have spent 9 years ensuring you never had one. She looked at Frederick. The northern wheat contracts expire in 12 days. The western wagons require new axle agreements before the harvest. The Briar Infirmary has medicine for 3 weeks. 2 tenant leases must be renewed before Monday. Frederick leaned back. I am certain the estate can survive a few administrative inconveniences. Evelyn nodded. Then it should have no difficulty surviving without me. She left the dining hall. Charles followed her into the corridor. You cannot abandon your responsibilities because Frederick offended you. You just announced that they were never mine. I relieved you of unnecessary work. No. You took authority from me while leaving the consequences attached. You are my wife. That is the only position you are willing to recognize. Charles lowered his voice. This is our home. It is the place where your family uses my work and laughs when I ask for the right to name it. You know what you mean to me. Evelyn looked at him. And everyone else knows what you allow me to mean when you leave the room. She continued towards her chambers. Where will you go? Greyhaven. Charles almost smiled from disbelief. The property was small, quiet, and considered unimportant. You will be back within the week. Evelyn opened her door. That assumption is why I must leave. Greyhaven belonged to Evelyn under her marriage settlement. Her father had insisted that one property and its income remain under her exclusive control. The Harcourts regarded it as an insignificant collection of fields surrounding an old stone house. They did not know Evelyn had spent years improving it. The warehouse roof had been repaired. A central market had been built. Unused land had been drained and prepared for farming. A transport yard connected the property to 2 major roads. New cottages stood near the eastern fields. Evelyn had intended Greyhaven to serve as a testing ground for systems Rosebury was too traditional to attempt. When her carriage reached its gates, the offices were ready. What Evelyn had not expected was company. Thomas Hale arrived before sunset, carrying 3 account books. She met him in the entrance hall. You have served the Harcourt family for 40 years. I served Rosebury. Then you should return. Thomas placed the books on the table. For 9 years, Rosebury has meant you. I will not ask you to break your oath. You are not asking. He removed the Rosebury steward's badge. I am choosing. That night, the estate accountant arrived with his wife and 2 daughters. By morning, the transport supervisor stood outside the gate with 12 drivers. Dr. Cole came from Briar Village carrying the infirmary records. Then Martha Cole arrived with representatives from 3 village workshops. Evelyn addressed them in Greyhaven's courtyard. I am not taking Rosebury tenants from their land. Martha folded her arms. No one said you were. Those with active leases should remain until the agreement's end. And if Lord Frederick raises the rent, you must decide what is best for your families. Martha looked around at the gathered workers. We already have. More people arrived over the following days. Not everyone left Rosebury. Many could not. Some feared Frederick. Others remained loyal to the Harcourt name. Evelyn accepted every decision without resentment. But the people whose contracts were directly connected to her private transport network, warehouses and markets, moved to Greyhaven voluntarily. Within 1 week, half of Rosebury's administrative system had disappeared. Frederick called it disloyalty. Charles called it temporary anger. Margaret called it manipulation. None of them understood that Evelyn had issued no command. People followed because they trusted the system she had built. Frederick responded by implementing his reforms immediately. He sold 1/3 of the grain reserve while prices were high. He closed the Briar Infirmary. He cancelled the old transport agreements and hired a cheaper company from London. He raised rent on the most productive farms. He ended payment extensions for injured workers. He dismissed 2 village managers who questioned him. The first monthly report showed a dramatic increase in revenue. Frederick placed it before Charles. "You see, your wife confused generosity with management." Charles examined the final figure. It was higher than any report he had signed in years. For several weeks, Rosebury appeared more profitable. Then the London Transport Company failed to collect the harvest on time. 3 wagons broke on the northern road because their axles were too light. Merchants rejected late deliveries. Workers from the closed infirmary traveled 20 miles for treatment and missed entire weeks of labor. 2 experienced farmers left after their rents increased. Others began hiding portions of their crops. The wood Frederick sold came from trees too young to replace themselves. Rosebury's income had risen because he was selling the structures that made future income possible. Charles received complaint after complaint. For the first time, there was no Evelyn in the next room to resolve them. He went to Greyhaven 6 weeks after her departure. Evelyn was inside the new market hall meeting with village representatives. Charles waited until the discussion ended. The room emptied slowly. People greeted him with respect but not warmth. When they were alone, he said, "Rosebury needs you." Evelyn closed the ledger. "Rosebury needed me when you declared me useless. I never used that word. You allowed it to stand in your dining hall." Frederick spoke in anger. He spoke with your keys in his hand. Charles moved closer. "I should have corrected him." "Yes, I am correcting it now. Come home." "Will Frederick be removed? He has made mistakes, but dismissing him immediately would divide the family." Evelyn nodded as though he had confirmed something she already knew. "You are not asking me to lead. You are asking me to repair what another man is still permitted to control. I am asking my wife to return. You have not yet understood why she left." Charles looked around the hall. "You built all of this without telling me. I told you about every improvement. You called them small projects. I did not know you intended to move Rosebury's workers here. I did not move them. They chose. You cannot allow half my estate to walk away." Evelyn's expression hardened. "They are not furniture, Charles." He stopped. She opened the ledger again. "I will not sabotage Rosebury. I will honor every contract Greyhaven signed. I will sell you goods at the same fair price I offer others, but I will not return to perform invisible work beneath Frederick's name." Charles looked at the reports on her desk. For the first time, he noticed their structure, the headings, the margin notes, the calculations. They looked exactly like the Rosebury reports he had signed for years. "Did you prepare the estate accounts yourself?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Most of them, all those years." "Yes." Charles had praised stewards for figures Evelyn produced. He had accepted political credit for improvements she designed. He had signed his name beneath work he had never bothered to understand. Before he could respond, a rider entered the courtyard, carrying an urgent letter from Rosebury. Charles broke the seal. An early frost had destroyed part of the northern harvest. Frederick had already sold most of the winter grain. The remaining stores would not feed the villages until spring. Evelyn read the fear on her husband's face. "How much remains?" she asked. Charles handed her the letter. "Less than 6 weeks." Greyhaven's warehouses held enough grain to prevent starvation, but returning it to Rosebury would place Evelyn under the authority of the same men who had removed her. Charles looked at his wife. For the first time, he was not asking her to save his pride. He was asking her to save his people. Charles looked at his wife. For the first time, he was not asking her to save his pride. He was asking her to save his people. Evelyn read the letter again. The northern harvest had failed across 4 villages. Frederick had sold most of Rosebury's reserve at the highest summer price and used the profit to fund estate improvements that produced no food. The remaining grain would last 6 weeks. Winter could last 5 months. "How many households?" Evelyn asked. "Nearly 700. Does that include laborers without tenant leases?" Charles hesitated. "I do not know." "Then the figure is incomplete." She crossed to a map of the district and marked the affected villages. Greyhaven has enough grain to prevent immediate hunger. Not enough to support Rosebury through the entire winter without new purchases. "I will pay whatever price you require. This is not a negotiation between you and me." "What is it?" "A test of whether you intend to change the system that created this crisis." Charles placed both hands on the desk. "Tell me what must be done." Evelyn looked directly at him. "The infirmary reopens today. Every rent increase Frederick imposed is suspended. No family is removed before spring. The remaining Rosebury stores are recorded publicly before a single sack moves. Distribution is managed by village representatives, not Frederick." Charles nodded. "And Frederick, he takes no part in the relief operation. My mother will say you are using hunger to seize control. Your mother may say whatever she wishes after the children have eaten." Charles lowered his eyes. Evelyn continued. "Greyhaven will sell grain at cost. Rosebury will pay the transport workers directly. Every account will be available for inspection. You do not trust me. You signed reports you did not read, and transferred authority to a man you had never watched manage anything." He accepted the answer. "What else?" "No one tells the villages their food came from the generosity of the Duke." Charles looked up. "Why?" "Because it did not." There was no cruelty in her tone, only accuracy. "The grain was grown, stored, and protected by people you allowed your brother to call inefficient. They deserve the truth." Charles straightened. "I accept your conditions." "Do you?" "Yes." "Then return to Rosebury and announce them publicly before I send the first wagon." Frederick opposed the plan before Charles had finished explaining it. The Harcourt family assembled in the estate office that evening. Margaret sat near the fire. Frederick remained behind the desk that had once been used by Evelyn and Thomas Hale. "You cannot surrender management to a woman who abandoned her home," Frederick said. "She did not abandon Rosebury," Charles replied. "I removed her authority. You relieved her of unnecessary interference." "The interference kept the estate alive." Frederick laughed. "One failed harvest does not invalidate every reform I made. You sold the grain reserve at an excellent price. We now need to buy it back at nearly twice the cost. That is the market. No, that is the consequence." Margaret lifted one hand. "Charles, humiliating your brother will not fill the stores. Neither will protecting him." Frederick stood. If Evelyn's grain enters Rosebury under her conditions, every tenant will believe the Duchess governs the estate. Charles looked at him. She did govern it. Silence settled over the room. Margaret's expression tightened. You cannot say that publicly. I should have said it years ago. You are the Duke. And I used that title to accept credit for work I did not understand. Frederick moved around the desk. You would surrender your authority because your wife has made you feel guilty? No. Charles removed the estate officer's chain from Frederick's coat. I am ending the authority I gave you because you have proved incapable of carrying it. Frederick seized his wrist. You cannot dismiss me over one season. Charles pulled free. I am dismissing you because every increase you reported came from selling what Rosebury required to survive the next year. He called the estate clerk into the room. Before Margaret, Frederick, and the senior household officers, Charles dictated the order. Frederick's management authority was revoked. All recent rent increases were suspended. The Briar Infirmary would reopen immediately. No tenant eviction could proceed before spring. Grain distribution would be supervised by village representatives. Rosebury's accounts would be submitted to independent review. Evelyn Harcourt's conditions were accepted in full. Frederick's face hardened. When this fails, you will blame me again. When it succeeds, I will not claim the credit. That answer ended the argument. The first Greyhaven wagons entered Rosebury the following morning. They did not travel beneath Harcourt banners. Each wagon carried a numbered inventory. Every village representative received a copy before the grain was unloaded. Martha Cole stood beside the scales. Thomas Hale recorded every sack. Dr. Cole reopened the infirmary with medicine supplied from Greyhaven. Evelyn did not enter the castle. She worked from the storehouse courtyard, where families could see the records and ask questions directly. Charles joined her after noon. He arrived without Frederick or Margaret. Several tenants removed their hats. Others watched him with open suspicion. He did not demand respect. "What have we missed?" he asked. Evelyn handed him a list. 23 laboring families have no formal tenancy. They were excluded from the original count. Charles read the names. "How did that happen?" "Your reports count leases, not people." He looked towards the waiting families. "What do we do?" "Add them. That reduces every household's ration, unless Rosebury purchases more grain. At the current price, the estate cannot afford enough." Evelyn pointed towards another figure. "Cancel the winter hunt." Margaret had invited more than 60 guests. Horses, food, and accommodation had already been arranged. Charles did not hesitate. "Cancel it. Sell the imported wine." "Yes." "Delay the drawing-room renovations." "Yes." "Use the parliamentary residence as security for a short-term loan." He paused. That house represented his political position in London. Evelyn waited. Charles looked again at the names of the families without leases. "Prepare the papers." It was the first decision he made that winter without asking how it would appear to other nobles. Frederick attempted to persuade the village managers that Evelyn intended to absorb Rosebury into Greyhaven. Few believed him. He visited Martha's workshop and warned her that following the Duchess would endanger her lease. Martha continued packing cheese into transport crates. "Her Grace protected my lease when my husband died. My family owns this land, and your family nearly emptied its stores. You owe loyalty to Rosebury." Martha looked at him. "We do not follow the Duchess because of her title. We follow her because she has never forgotten our names." Frederick left without another threat. He had finally encountered a form of authority that could not be inherited. The winter worsened. Snow blocked the northern road. 2 contracted merchants failed to deliver. A warehouse roof collapsed under ice. Evelyn divided the remaining supplies by week rather than village. Charles travelled with the wagon teams and learned why routes could not be managed from a desk. He saw drivers repair axles in freezing rain. He watched village women weigh grain and reject an inaccurate scale. He discovered that the infirmary served not only the sick, but also children whose parents worked far from home. Every system Evelyn had defended existed because someone depended upon it. They were not generous decorations added to the estate. They were the estate. One evening, Charles returned to the castle with mud on his coat and found Margaret waiting in the entrance hall. "You are behaving like a steward. I am learning what my stewards do. You have allowed Evelyn to reduce the dignity of your position. No. She has shown me the cost of pretending dignity is a substitute for competence." Margaret's face changed. "You speak as though your family taught you nothing. You taught me how to preserve appearances. And your wife? She taught me to ask what those appearances were hiding." Margaret walked away without answering. By January, no Rosebury household had gone without food. The emergency was not over, but the system held. Charles invited Evelyn to attend a full estate council at Rosebury Castle. She agreed on one condition. The village representatives would attend as voting members. Margaret objected. Charles accepted. The great dining hall was arranged exactly as it had been on the evening Evelyn lost her authority. This time, no one sat above her. Thomas Hale placed the new management charter on the table. It stated that Evelyn would hold equal authority over estate, finances, agricultural planning, tenant agreements, medical and emergency services, transport contracts, grain reserves, appointment of senior managers. Neither Charles nor Evelyn could remove the other from those responsibilities without a formal council vote and written cause. Frederick entered before the document was signed. He looked towards Evelyn's former seat. Charles stood beside it. "You asked me to come, to hear the final decision." Frederick glanced at the charter. "You are giving your wife half the estate." "No," Evelyn said. "The land remains legally Rosebury property. The authority concerns management." Frederick smiled coldly. "Different words for the same surrender." Charles faced him. "I am not surrendering authority. I am returning the authority I took credit for without understanding." He lifted the ring of estate keys. For years, Evelyn had carried them without official recognition. Now Charles held them out before the council. She did not take them. Keys without defined power are only decoration. Thomas opened the charter. Every clause was read aloud. Charles signed first. Evelyn signed second. The village representatives added their names as witnesses. Only then did Evelyn accept the keys. No one laughed. Frederick was removed from Rosebury. Charles required him to repay the cost of the cancelled hunt and the losses caused by the premature timber sale using his personal allowance. He was not imprisoned or publicly ruined. He was simply denied further access to money and authority he had never earned. Margaret remained at the castle, but she no longer attended estate meetings unless invited. For the first time, her family name did not guarantee control of every room. Evelyn did not move back into Rosebury immediately. Greyhaven had become more than a refuge. It was a functioning estate with people who depended upon her leadership. She divided her time between both properties. Charles did not pressure her to return. He understood that restoring her office was not the same as restoring their marriage. That work would take longer. In early spring, Charles arrived at Greyhaven alone. No carriage escort. No secretary. He carried a stack of quarterly reports beneath one arm. Evelyn was working in the market office. She looked at the papers. What requires attention? I have read every page. Did you sign them? No. Why not? He opened the first report. 3 figures do not agree. The grain delivered to Briar exceeds the amount removed from the central store, but the transport account shows no second shipment. Evelyn examined the page. What do you think happened? Charles hesitated. The village used part of its emergency reserve. Continue. The reserve should have been recorded separately. Yes. And if it was not, next season's calculation will assume grain that no longer exists. Evelyn waited. Charles looked towards her. I would like you to show me what else I have missed. This was different from every file he had placed on her desk during their marriage. He was not asking her to finish the work before he returned to London. He had begun it himself. Evelyn pointed towards the chair opposite her. Sit down. Begin with the grain account. Charles sat. For the next hour, they reviewed every column. He asked questions. He did not interrupt the answers. When they finished, he closed the ledger. I told you that you did not need to burden yourself with estate matters. You did. Then I left those matters on your desk. Yes. I wanted your labor without admitting I depended upon your judgment. Evelyn met his eyes. And when others insulted that judgment, you protected the peace instead of protecting me. I know. No, Charles. You understand the sentence. Knowing it requires changing what you do when the room is watching. He nodded. I cannot ask you to trust that change before you see it. It was the first apology he offered without attaching a request. Evelyn returned the ledger to him. Bring me next month's report after you have checked it yourself. May I come back? For the report. A small smile touched his face. For the report. Charles returned the following month. Then the month after that. He learned the accounts, traveled the wagon routes, and attended village meetings without expecting to speak first. When a visiting lord praised him for Rosebury's recovery, Charles corrected him before Evelyn could respond. The winter system was designed by the Duchess. I nearly destroyed it by refusing to recognize whose work I was signing. Margaret heard him. So did the entire dining table. This time, Charles did not wait until they were alone. Evelyn looked at him across the room. The statement did not erase 9 years, but it proved he finally understood where repair had to begin. By summer, she agreed to spend part of each week at Rosebury Castle. She kept Greyhaven. She kept her contracts. She kept her name on every report she prepared. Charles never again told her not to burden herself with the work that held their world together. And Evelyn never again performed that work without the authority, recognition, and respect required to do it properly. Half the estate had followed her when she left. She returned only after the Duke learned that loyalty could not be commanded by a title. It had to be earned.